Fellas, there's a few fighters in the UFC that are more active on Twitter than they are in the octagon, and I'm going to be making a top 10 list of rankings of the 10 most active fighters, or the 10 most, I'm going to say, Twitter warrior type fighters in the UFC. So the fighters that are always talking on Twitter, making sure they're up to date with everything that goes on, making sure they give an opinion on everything. And yeah, that's essentially what I'm going to be going over in the top 10 rankings. Starting off with a 10th fighter, Jon Jones. Now, Jon Jones, I'm not going to say he's this massive Twitter personality, but he's definitely very active on Twitter. I mean, recently with the whole Tom Aspinall thing, sending paragraphs after paragraphs just about how he doesn't want to fight Tom Aspinall. Like, just say you don't want to fight him. He's writing about how Tom doesn't deserve it. He's, upplaying his own legacy, saying how he's great and Stipe is great and everything like that, but just doing everything accepting the fact that he doesn't want to fight Tom Aspinall. Even back in 2020, after he'd fought Reyes and he was preparing for his heavyweight debut, he was talking so much on Twitter, and he hadn't fought in 3 years. It was like he was way more active on Twitter than he was in the octagon for the period of 2020 to 2023. But yeah, Jon Jones, I'm not going to say he's one of the biggest Twitter warriors in the UFC, but he's definitely very active on Twitter, definitely has a lot to say, especially against people like Covington as well. He kind of threw shit at Covington after UFC 296, so he doesn't have a bad Twitter account, but he's definitely very active on Twitter. Number 9, I've gone Belal Muhammad. Yeah, Belal Muhammad, again, he's one of those fighters that has an opinion on everything. I mean, for the whole Leon Edwards and Colby Covington thing, this guy was tweeting so much, tweeting about everything that Leon Edwards' coach would say as well. Overall, Belal Muhammad he's coming out with these weird quotes as well, even dissing people like McGregor at some point. Darren Till even got into some exchanges with. Belal Muhammad's very active on Twitter. Now, I don't know if it's Belal Muhammad or his manager, and we'll talk about that in the later end of the video, but Belal Muhammad, yeah, definitely very active in the UFC on Twitter. Not active in the UFC, more active on Twitter, but... And it's ironic how he's the one that's talking the most on Twitter. And then you look at his fights, and I don't want to be one of these guys that just sit here and talk about how boring Belal Muhammad is, because it's kind of boring now talking about him, but he's not the most exciting fighter to be talking the most on Twitter. He's trying to hype himself up, saying that him and Leon, they should be doing this, should be doing that, and just overall... He's trying to be a hype man for himself, and to be honest, you have to be if you want to grow, but I don't know. The guy's just talking about the most random shit on Twitter, and personally... I don't know, he just kind of comes across as... Like I said, I don't know if it's him or if it's his manager, but he just comes across as a bit weird to me. So I've gone Belal Muhammad for 9. 8, I've gone Manel Kape. Now, one thing I've noticed about Manel Kape is, first of all, he's not extremely active on Twitter. He's not tweeting every 2 days. So I'd say he's got a pretty normal Twitter account. But one thing I will say is Manel Kape, I always find him arguing with people outside of his weight class. He's been arguing with Izzy ever since the UFC 293 press conference. He's been throwing shade at Izzy multiple times on Twitter. And even McGregor at one point. I'm pretty sure McGregor said he wants to move to middleweight, or he wants to fight on 3. I don't know what McGregor said, but I remember him throwing shade at McGregor at some point as well. So I've noticed that Manel Kape, he just loves throwing shade at people outside of his weight class. And it's a shame as well, because he didn't even get to fight in the end. He was pretty verbal on Twitter, pretty verbal on the mic, and then when it got to, fighting the other week on the Johnny Walker Ankalaev card, he couldn't fight because his opponent refused to fight him because Manel Kape missed weight. So it's a shame that he missed weight, and I just hope that he stays off Twitter and gets in the octagon as soon as possible. And I'm sure he will, because it wasn't like no one got injured. It was simply just a weight miss. So hopefully he can get rescheduled, but I've had to include Manel Kape. Number 7, I've gone Islam Makhachev. Now, Islam Makhachev himself, I don't think he's very active on Twitter. It's the guy who runs Islam Makhachev's account, Ali Abdelaziz. So I should probably put Islam Makhachev brackets Ali Abdelaziz. Yeah, this guy is essentially... the other day he exposed himself as well as kind of being on Islam's account. He tweeted something like, he's probably going to lose to Arman, and still I'm not going to have to run, talking in as if he's Islam Makhachev, so he was on the wrong account. If you don't know, Ali Abdelaziz essentially runs the Twitter pages of every single one of the fighters that he manages. It came out in the end. Islam Makhachev in real life and on the mic, he never really talks. He's a pretty quiet guy in real life, but for some reason on Twitter, he's very loud, and that's not because it's Islam, it's because it's Ali Abdelaziz, and I feel like he likes to talk the most on Islam Makhachev's account. At one point, I think he even tweeted something along the lines of Umar Nurmagomedov is higher than Charles Oliveira on the GOAT list. So I'm going to have to include Islam. Maybe it's not Islam himself, but whoever runs that account, aka Ali Abdelaziz, very, very active on Twitter. In fact, if I had to give a ranking to anyone who wasn't in the UFC, it would definitely have to be Ali Abdelaziz, right? Number 6, I've gone Mokaev. This guy is essentially I mean, he's worse than Manel Kape when it comes to Twitter. Not that Manel Kape is necessarily bad when it comes to tweeting, but Mohamed Makhachev, how many guys has this guy thrown shade at? Thrown shade at Brandon Royval. And the thing is, the Brandon Royval thing was unprovoked. I'm pretty sure someone tweeted something saying that Brandon Royval versus Moreno, the rematch, should be for a BMF belt. And then Mohamed Makhachev started dissing how many losses Royval had. And then it was just for no reason. It was so uncalled for. He's also thrown shade at people like Amir Albazi. I think he's called out Manel Kape as well. This guy's talking to everyone on Twitter in the flyweight division. Any flyweight. I think he's even got into a beef with just random people on Twitter as well. So I'm going to have to include Mohamed Makhachev as well. And it's not even like he's the most exciting fighter. Like, if you're going to talk a lot on Twitter, at least deliver exciting fights. Mohamed Makhachev, his fights, listen, he gets finishes. I'm not going to say he's a decision machine or anything. He does manage to get finishes. He's a great submission artist. But his fights aren't the most eventful. It does consist of him kind of just picking opponents up, slamming them to the floor and laying on them for about, every round. I mean, his fights, he hasn't gone for, I was about to say 5 rounds. He's not in the 5-round fights yet. He's mainly 3 rounds, but he'll basically just lay on them until he finds a submission. But yeah, his fights aren't that eventful. He's very active on Twitter. So I'm going to have to put Manel Kape at 6. Number 5, I've gone Khamzat Chimaev. The main reason is this guy, someone said it the other day and it's true. Khamzat Chimaev has to be about 30-0 in hypothetical matchups. The amount of guys this guy's called out, he's called out Adesanya. He even said he's going to beat Jon Jones and Alex Pereira at one point. He's called out so many people. He's thrown shade to so many people on Twitter, even making memes about Colby Covington, and he's so inactive to be doing this. Like, Alex Pereira joined the UFC in 2021 and he's already got 2 belts to his name. Khamzat Chimaev joined in 2020 and he's not got a single belt. And he's not even had a title fight yet. That's the thing with Khamzat Chimaev. He's very, very verbal and very, very active on Twitter, but then when it comes to actually fighting, he's got an average fight. Well, he's fighting on average once a year. He fought once in 2021, once in 2023, only twice in 2022 as well. So Khamzat Chimaev is just extremely inactive, but when it comes to Twitter and when it comes to calling people out, he's undefeated. Like I said, 30-0 in hypothetical matchups. So I'm going to have to include Khamzat Chimaev on this list. Number 4, I've gone with, now this is a bit of a weird one because he's not in the UFC anymore and it's not UFC related what he tweets, but because he's part of the UFC before, I'm going to have to mention him, and that's Jake Shields. Jake Shields might have one of the biggest Twitter interactions some of the biggest Twitter interactions out of everyone else in the UFC. He essentially tweets about the Palestine and Israeli things that are going on. So I'm not going to start pulling them tweets up because it's quite irrelevant to the video. But yeah, Jake Shields is massive on Twitter. He ends up getting posts that get to like 150k at one point. He's at it basically every single time he posts, he'll get to like 10, 20, 30k, which is a lot of likes for a guy that just came from the UFC and just tweets about what's going on in the world right now. So Jake Shields, not a UFC fighter anymore or anything like that. He's not really related to the UFC anymore, but I'm just going to have to give him an honourable mention in the list because of how big he is on Twitter. Also pretty active as well, so I'm going to have to put Jake Shields at 4. Number 3, now we're into the top 3 rankings of the Twitter, kind of the Twitter trolls. I don't want to say Twitter trolls because they're not trolls, they're fighters, but you know what I mean, like the active kind of tweeters in the UFC. At number 3, I've gone with Terrence McKinney. This guy, I was actually surprised how active he was on Twitter. He might be more active on Twitter than any other fighter. It's like he's tweeting at people every 10 minutes. He's so active on Twitter. And the thing is with Terrence McKinney, it's not just MMA fighters. I swear he was calling out KSI at one point. He's been calling out, I know he's in the UFC, but he's been calling out Paddy Pimblett as well. But to be fair, a lot of the lightweights have. He's just calling a lot of people out, always, showing his opinions on everything. You go to his Twitter and you check his replies. He's replying to posts every few hours. He's so active on Twitter. He's essentially just become a Twitter personality nowadays. Again, I'm not throwing shade to him as a fighter. It was kind of funny though at the beginning of the year when he got knocked out cold. After all the talking he did on Twitter, it was kind of ironic. But Terrence McKinney, I'm going to have to give him a number 3 spot because of how active he is on Twitter. The fact that every single time he pops up on my feed, it's always like a few hours. So Terrence McKinney, I put him at number 3. Now we're into the top 2. Number 2, I've gone Paulo Costa. I mean, I don't really blame him. I'm going to be honest. Out of everyone on this list, I probably prefer Paulo Costa's Twitter page to everyone. He's essentially just a meme page where he posts memes similar like about MMA. So whether it be about his opponents like Robert Whittaker or who's he fought? Luke Rockhold. There was a post that went viral of him when Luke Rockhold was smearing blood into him, and he was talking about how he's the new gay idol, and he was talking about how that's not how he wants people to represent him. He always mocks Adesanya on Twitter as well, kind of like Manel Cap. Yeah, Paulo Costa is essentially a meme page, and he's probably got the worst reputation of talking a lot on Twitter and then pulling out of fights. He's well known for his pullouts. He's Paulo Costa, very active on Twitter, not so active in the octagon. He actually has a worse average fight per year than Khamzat Chimaev. So number 2 is Paulo Costa, and number 1, it's got to be Conor McGregor. I don't know what he wants to do on Twitter. It's so weird, his Twitter, because at one point he'll be quite serious. I know I've pulled out a tweet that's not so serious, but sometimes he'll be really serious, congratulating people, being all happy, and then the next minute, he's calling Tom Aspinall a mushhead rat, or he's calling out random people in random divisions. He's got such a random Twitter page as Conor McGregor. He's retired about 5 times on Twitter throughout his entire career. Conor McGregor, just one of the weirdest Twitter pages I've ever seen, saying he's going to fight this person, how he'd beat this person, how he'd beat that person, and again, he's not fought since 2021 when he got beaten by Poirier. Well, it was an injury, but before that, obviously got knocked out by Poirier. So McGregor, I'm going to have to give him the champion role. I'm going to have to give him number 1 for the biggest tweeter in the UFC is Conor McGregor. But yeah, that is my list for the biggest tweeters in the UFC. Let me know if you change anything. I probably should put Chris Curtis as an honourable mention as well, just because of how he replies to every fan. But yeah, that's my top 10 ranking list for the biggest tweeters in the UFC. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree? And thank you for watching.